By dawn,
We can't keep
Ethan
ignoring
had
this.
transformed their
It has to
bedroom
stop
into a
now.
makeshift war room, though Lily did not know it yet. He held her sleeping form and made silent vows that Richard Hale would answer for what he had done, but not through violence. Instead, Ethan would use the one thing he possessed that Richard underestimated: his mind and his past. 10 years ago, before he met Lily, Ethan had been a corporate strategist at one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country. He had walked away from that world to build a quieter life, but he had never forgotten the names, the scandals, the hidden financial records, and the unspoken rules that governed the elite circles Richard Hale inhabited. At 6 in the morning, Ethan made the first call to Marcus Webb, his former mentor, who now sat on the board of directors at Richard Hale's company. Marcus answered on the third ring. "Ethan Carter? Is that really you? It has been years, my friend." Ethan kept his voice steady and professional. "Marcus, I need to ask you about Richard Hale. What can you tell me about his background, his ethics, his history?" There was a long pause, and Ethan could sense Marcus calculating whether to speak. The pause told him everything he needed to know. Over the next several hours, Ethan became someone Lily had never seen before, while remaining exactly who she had always known him to be. He was gentle when he brought her coffee and held her hand, but his eyes held fierce intelligence as he opened his laptop and began searching. He called old contacts, people he had not spoken to in years, and each conversation peeled back another layer of Richard Hale's carefully constructed facade. A junior associate at his former firm confirmed that Richard had been investigated 5 years ago for inappropriate conduct with a subordinate, but the complaint had been quietly settled and sealed. A business journalist he knew revealed that Richard had multiple affairs and that his wife was unaware of his infidelities. An accountant friend mentioned questionable expense reports and offshore accounts that did not quite add up. By noon, Ethan had compiled enough information to see the full picture of Richard Hale's corruption. Lily watched her husband work and felt something shift inside her. The man before her was not the accountant who loved gardening and cooking Sunday dinner. He was someone else entirely, someone who moved through the digital world with precision and purpose. "Ethan, what are you doing? What are you planning?" Ethan looked at his wife and saw fear mixed with something else. Hope, perhaps, that justice was possible. He took her hands and kissed her forehead. "Listen to me, Lily. I am not going to hurt him. I am not going to lower myself to his level. Instead, I am going to give him exactly what he deserves, the truth exposed in the light where he cannot hide. I have evidence that he has done this before, that he has hurt other women, and that he has stolen from the company. I am going to make sure every board member, every news outlet, and every authority that needs to know learns everything by this evening." Lily felt tears stream down her face as she realized her husband was not seeking revenge, but rather justice. He was protecting not just her, but potentially protecting other women from falling victim to a predator. Ethan spent the afternoon meticulously organizing his findings into a presentation that would be impossible to ignore. He created a timeline of Richard's misconduct, he documented the financial irregularities, and he reached out to other women whose names had appeared in whispered conversations throughout Richard's career. By 4 o'clock, he had 4 separate women willing to speak on record about Richard's inappropriate behavior. "We are going to end this," Ethan said to Lily, "and we are going to do it together, not with your name first, but with all of them together, so no one can claim it was a personal vendetta or a misunderstanding." What we learn. This part reveals that true strength often looks different than we expect. Ethan demonstrates that patience, planning, and justice pursued through proper channels is far more powerful than immediate retaliation. His willingness to use his intelligence rather than violence shows us that protecting those we love requires wisdom and strategy. Lily learns that she is not alone, that her husband will stand beside her, not to avenge her, but to ensure that no one else suffers as she did. The collective action of multiple victims reminds us that speaking truthfully, especially as a group, creates power that individual voices sometimes cannot. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Ethan had forwarded his meticulously compiled evidence to 3 board members simultaneously, including Marcus Webb and 2 independent directors who had reputations for integrity. They received files containing financial documentation, timelines of misconduct, witness statements from other women, and correspondence that proved Richard had covered his tracks while harassing those beneath him. The responses came quickly, within minutes. One director responded, "This is comprehensive and deeply concerning. We will convene an emergency meeting at 7 this evening." Another director called directly, "Carter, I have reviewed what you sent. I am calling our legal counsel immediately. Richard will not know what is coming." The board wanted to handle this internally at first, but Ethan had anticipated this weakness. He had simultaneously reached out to a journalist at the Washington Post named Sarah Chen, who had covered corporate misconduct extensively. Sarah received her package of information at 5:15, and by 5:30 she was already confirming facts and preparing a story that would break online by midnight. Ethan sat beside Lily on their couch as the sun began to set, holding her hand, and waited. He had done what he could. Now the wheels of justice that he had set in motion would turn without his help. The waiting was harder than the planning, but he remained calm for her sake. At 6:50, Lily received an unexpected call from Human Resources. "We are experiencing an emergency situation involving Mr. Hale. An investigation has been opened, and we need to speak with you as soon as possible. Can you come in tonight?" Lily looked at Ethan with frightened eyes, and he nodded, knowing that this was the moment when her testimony would become official and real. Ethan drove her to the office where they sat in a conference room with HR representatives and the head of security for 3 hours as Lily recounted every detail of what Richard had done. They recorded her statement, they documented her emotional state, and they assured her that she was protected by company policy from any retaliation. At 9:15 p.m., Ethan received a call from Marcus Webb. "Richard has been suspended pending investigation. The board is reviewing everything, and we are meeting with our legal team. The other women have also made statements. We are recommending immediate termination, and we are reporting this to law enforcement." Ethan thanked Marcus and ended the call, knowing that the hardest part still remained. At midnight, the Washington Post article went live. "Richard Hale, powerful executive, faces multiple sexual harassment claims and financial fraud investigation." The headline was devastating, and by morning it would domino across every news outlet and business publication in the country. When Ethan and Lily finally returned home at 2 in the morning, she was emotionally drained, but something in her had shifted. She was no longer purely a victim. She had spoken her truth in an official capacity. She had helped expose a predator, and in doing so, she had discovered that her voice mattered, that her experience mattered, and that justice, while imperfect, was possible. Ethan held her as she wept, but these were tears of catharsis rather than despair. He whispered to her, "You were so brave today, Lily. You did that. You spoke, and the whole system is responding because what happened to you matters." The next morning, as Richard Hale arrived at the office, he found his building access revoked, his desk cleared, and a stack of legal documents informing him of his suspension. His phone exploded with messages from board members, colleagues, and his own attorney. His career was in free fall. His reputation was in tatters, and there was nothing he could do to stop the avalanche he had triggered through his own entitlement and cruelty. By afternoon, his wife had discovered his infidelities, his employers had discovered his financial crimes, and the authorities were opening a formal investigation. What we learn, Part 3, demonstrates that exposure and accountability through proper channels creates far lasting justice than revenge or violence could ever achieve. Ethan shows us that strategic thinking, compassion, and the willingness to help others speak creates a powerful coalition for change. Lily discovers that her trauma, while real and significant, does not have to define her future, and that speaking truthfully despite fear is an act of profound courage. The collective action of multiple witnesses shows us that systems designed to protect people work best when good people use them. The board members who acted swiftly show us that organizations can respond appropriately when given complete information.
and we learn that silence is often what protects wrongdoers.
3 days had passed since Richard Hale's public downfall, and Lily sat alone in the garden of their home, watching birds move through the flowering bushes. She wore one of Ethan's oversized sweaters despite the mild autumn weather, and her blonde hair fell loosely around her face. Her phone had buzzed constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers offering support and validation. The company had promoted her to senior director and offered her a substantial raise, but these external validations felt hollow compared to the internal reckoning she was experiencing. She had realized something profound during these 3 days, that her marriage had nearly been destroyed not by Richard's actions alone, but by the patterns in her own life that had made her vulnerable to his predatory behavior. When Ethan came outside, "Lily, what are you thinking about?" She turned to face him, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. "I have been thinking about how I never questioned why he wanted me in that hallway. I never trusted my own instincts when I felt something was wrong. I dismissed my own discomfort to be polite, to be professional, to be accommodating. I have spent so much of my life making myself smaller so that powerful men would feel comfortable around me." Ethan sat beside her and listened, understanding that she was processing something deeper than the assault itself. She was examining the 1,000 small compromises women make that gradually erode their sense of self and safety. "I want to change," determined, Lily said. "I want to stop apologizing for taking up space. I want to stop smiling when I feel threatened. I want to reclaim the parts of myself that I have given away to make others comfortable. And I want to do this not just for me, but because I never want another woman to feel as small and powerless as I did in that moment." Ethan reached over and took her hand and spoke words that would echo through the rest of their marriage. "Lily, I have always loved you, but I love who you are becoming right now. The woman who is brave enough to face not just what was done to her, but what she allowed to be done to herself. That takes a different kind of courage." Over the following weeks, Ethan and Lily made intentional choices to rebuild their relationship, not by forgetting what had happened, but by transforming it into something that strengthened rather than weakened them. Lily began therapy, not just to process the trauma of Richard's actions, but to understand the patterns in her own psychology that had taught her to minimize her own needs. She learned to say no without apologizing. She learned to trust her instincts even when others questioned them. She learned that her worth was not dependent on her productivity, her appearance, or her willingness to accommodate others. "I realize now that Richard did not create the vulnerability in me. He simply exploited what was already there, and that is perhaps the most important realization I can have." Ethan, for his part, confronted his own patterns. He realized that his silence before the party, his willingness to let Lily attend alone without fully trusting his instincts, had been a form of conflict avoidance born from his own fear. He had wanted to be the kind of husband who trusted completely, but he had confused real trust with ignoring his legitimate concerns. He began working with a therapist as well, to understand his own patterns and to become not just a husband who responds to crisis, but a partner who is present and attentive in the everyday moments. The couple started a ritual of honest conversation every evening where they shared not just the events of their day, but their fears, doubts, and the small ways they were learning to love each other better. What We Learn, Part 4, teaches us that trauma recovery is not about forgetting, but about integrating difficult experiences into our understanding of ourselves. Lily demonstrates that examining our own role in creating vulnerability is not about blaming ourselves, but about reclaiming our power. She teaches us that true healing requires both individual work and relational work. Ethan shows us that supportive partners must also examine themselves and their patterns to avoid repeating cycles. The couple reminds us that marriage is not a static state, but a living thing that requires constant attention, care, and honest communication to thrive after crisis. The education here is profound. If we ignore the patterns within ourselves that make us vulnerable, we remain victims even after justice is served. Ethan Carter stood at the kitchen counter watching his wife Lily slip into an emerald green dress that caught the light like water holding stars. "You look absolutely breathtaking," he whispered as she adjusted the delicate silver necklace he had given her on their 5th wedding anniversary. She turned and kissed him softly, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulder in loose waves. That was 6 years ago, and his heart still quickened when she looked at him that way. "Promise me you will have fun tonight," Ethan said as he held her close. Lily laughed and rested her head against his chest. "For a corporate event, I will do my best," she replied. "I would rather stay here with you, watching that terrible movie you love so much, but my boss said—" "Richard Hale, the new executive vice president, specifically requested that I attend." Ethan felt a strange flutter in his chest when she mentioned Richard Hale, but he pushed it away. He knew Lily worked hard as a marketing director, and she deserved recognition. He would never be the kind of husband who held her back from opportunities, even if his instincts whispered warnings he could not quite name. 3 hours later, Lily stood in the glittering ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, surrounded by colleagues in tailored suits and expensive jewelry. The orchestra played soft jazz and champagne flowed freely across marble tables. She felt beautiful, confident, and proud of the campaign she had developed for the new product launch. A hand suddenly touched the small of her back, and Richard Hale materialized beside her. "There you are, Lily," he said smoothly. "I was hoping we could talk privately about your future here at the company." His dark eyes held something predatory beneath their charm, and before she could respond, he guided her toward a dimly lit hallway, away from the music and the watching eyes. What happened next occurred in moments, but felt like hours. His touch became possessive, his words became presumptuous, and his entitlement became suffocating. When he pressed her against the wall and his hand moved where it had no right to be, Lily found her voice and pushed back hard. She slapped his face with all the strength she could muster and fled back to the ballroom, her hands shaking, her heart breaking. She told no one at the party. She simply called for a car and rode home in silence, staring at her reflection in the dark window, wondering how everything had changed so quickly. At 4 in the morning, Lily sat on the edge of their bed, unable to sleep, unable to forget. Ethan stirred groggily and reached for her. "Baby, what is wrong?" he asked, pulling himself awake. When she turned to face him in the darkness of their bedroom, her face streaked with tears. His entire world shifted. She told him everything, and with each word, Ethan felt something ancient and protective awaken within him. Not rage, but fierce, devoted love for his broken wife. He held her as she sobbed and whispered promises that this would not define them or their love. He would handle this, and he would do it right. What we learn? Ethan teaches us that true love is not about rage or revenge against those who harm the people we cherish. Instead, love becomes most powerful when it is channeled into justice, wisdom, and unwavering support for the person we love. Lily teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness, but courage, and that sharing our pain with those we trust allows us to heal together. Richard represents a cautionary lesson about entitlement and the abuse of power, showing us how corruption flourishes when good people stay silent.
6 months had passed, and Ethan stood in the kitchen of their home watching dawn break across the horizon in shades of pink and gold. He had woken early, as he often did these days, filled with a quiet contentment that had taken him months to feel again. Lily emerged from their bedroom, smiling, still half asleep, and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. They stood together in silence, watching the sun rise higher and brighter in the sky. This was their ritual now, born from the understanding that each new day was a choice to keep loving each other, to keep growing, and to keep honoring what they had survived together. The morning light illuminated the kitchen, and Ethan turned to face his wife, eyes full of emotion. "Do you remember what you said to me 3 weeks after everything happened?" Lily smiled softly, nodding. "I said that I wanted to reclaim my life, and that I wanted to do it with you." Ethan kissed her forehead and pulled her close, whispering, "You have done that. You have reclaimed more than your life. You have reclaimed yourself, and in doing so, you have given me the gift of truly understanding what love means. Love is not about protecting someone so much that they remain frozen in their trauma. It is about standing beside them while they move through that trauma and emerge stronger on the other side. Lily pulled back to look at her husband, and she saw in his eyes a depth of knowing that had not been there before. He had changed too. The quiet strategist had become a more vulnerable partner. The man who had once moved through life with careful distance had learned to be present in ways both large and small. I love you, Ethan Carter, more today than I did the morning of that party, because I love not just the man who fought for justice on my behalf. I love the man who listened to my fear without immediately trying to fix it. I love the man who examined his own heart and his own patterns. I love the man who chose every single day to build something stronger with me than what was broken. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Ethan made coffee, and Lily sat at the kitchen table, working on the book she had begun to write, about her experience, about recovery, about the messy, complicated journey of learning to trust yourself again. After months of therapy, she had decided that speaking her story publicly was part of her healing and part of her contribution to changing the culture that had allowed Richard to harm so many women without consequence. I want other women to know that healing is possible and that the patterns we inherit as women are not our fault, but they are our responsibility to change for ourselves and for the generations that come after us. That afternoon, they received a call from the district attorney's office. Richard Hale's case was being taken to trial, and they had charged him not only with assault, but with financial fraud and systematic harassment of multiple employees. With relief, Lily felt a wave of emotion wash over her, but it was different than before. It was not the terror and violation of that night at the party. It was the solid ground of knowing that she had spoken truth, and that truth was carrying weight in the world. Ethan held her hand as she took the call, and when she hung up, smiling through tears, she turned to him and said, "This ends here. This does not define the rest of our story. This is just one chapter that we survived, and we grew, and we loved each other through it." As evening fell, Ethan and Lily sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Holding hands, they talked about the future, about the possibility of children someday, about Lily's book and Ethan's plan to use his skills to volunteer with organizations that protected people in corporate environments from exploitation and abuse. Their love had not erased what had happened, but it had been tempered and strengthened by it, like steel folded in fire. They had learned that real partnership meant showing up not just in crisis, but in the patient, unglamorous work of building something genuine day after day. When night fell completely and the stars emerged above them, Ethan whispered to his wife, with voice full of tenderness, "We are going to be okay, Lily. We are more than okay. We are stronger because we faced this together. We did not let it destroy us. We did not let it separate us. We let it teach us and transform us into people who know the true value of what we have found in each other." Nodding, Lily rested her head against his shoulder, knowing that tomorrow morning they would wake again, and the sun would rise again, and they would face it together, as they had faced this darkness together. Their love had been tested in ways most people never experience, but it had endured, and in enduring, it had become unbreakable. Lessons from the entire story. The complete journey of Ethan and Lily teaches us several profound truths about love, trauma, and justice. First, we learn that true strength in the face of violation is not about retaliation or revenge, but about channeling our pain into purposeful action that protects not just ourselves, but others. Ethan demonstrated this by using his intelligence and resources not to harm Richard, but to expose him through legitimate channels. This teaches us that the most powerful form of justice is the one that operates through truth and accountability. Second, we learn that vulnerability is not weakness. Lily showed us that admitting fear and pain to those we trust is not a failure, but a path to genuine healing. She learned to speak uncomfortable truths, and in doing so, she gave herself and others permission to do the same. This challenges the cultural narrative that women should be silent about their experiences in order to protect those around them. Third, we learn that healing requires individual work and relational work.
Ethan and Lily each confronted their own patterns, and patterns passed down through their families and cultures. They recognized that real partnership means being willing to examine ourselves, not just our external circumstances. This teaches us that relationships deepen when both partners are committed to growth and self-awareness. Fourth, we learn that patterns of vulnerability and weakness often have roots deeper than any single traumatic event. Lily had spent her life learning to accommodate others, to minimize herself, and to prioritize the comfort of those with power over her own safety. This did not cause Richard's behavior, but it did create conditions where she was more vulnerable to it. Understanding this distinction allows us to heal both our immediate wounds and the deeper wounds that made us susceptible to those wounds in the first place. Finally, we learn that love is not a feeling, but a practice. Love is the choice Ethan made every day to stand beside Lily while she healed. Love is the work Lily did to reclaim her own voice and agency. Love is the commitment they both made to examine themselves honestly and to show up for each other with vulnerability and strength. Real love is not about perfection or protection. It is about presence and persistence and the willingness to be changed by those we love. The story of Ethan and Lily reminds us that we all contain within us the capacity to survive harm, to seek justice, and to build something meaningful from our pain. The question is not whether we will face difficulty, but whether we will face it alone or together, and whether we will allow it to break us or to strengthen us into people who know the true value of what we have found in each other.